And now on Nights with Steve Price from the 50-Up Club, Christopher Zinn.
Joins us every Thursday night. How are you, Christopher?
I'm very well, thank you, Steve, and yourself.
How could you be, given this weather? I know we don't want to turn into weather whingers, but boy, it's been wet and cold.
I get up very early in the morning, so I get it wetter and colder than most. But
And I mentioned on the program last night and again tonight, and this is an issue that is right up the alley of the 50-Up Club. I think often about older Australians, particularly those on fixed incomes, whether they be self-funded retirees or pensioners, who seriously, and you know this is a fact, don't turn their heating on because they're afraid of their power bills.
exactly, and in fact, there's some research from the University of Wollongong that's looking at this and has found exactly that people unplug things that don't really. We've got fairly old-fashioned ideas of how to save energy, which actually aren't always very effective. So I think there's going to be some new advice about what people can do that doesn't actually make them uncomfortable or freezing cold, but does actually help reduce the bill.
Well, one of the things you think about, we have tax breaks and financial breaks for older Australians on a whole range of things. Public transport, I mean, you can travel around Sydney for $2.50 on all public transport for a whole day, right? And we can think of a dozen or so deals. Why don't we have a system in place where older people on lower incomes don't have a cheaper power rate?
Well, there actually is. The state government has one, and there's various rebates involved. The problem is that
no one knows about it.
What people don't know about it, and also there are people who know about it, but for whatever reason, sometimes it's embarrassment, or sometimes it can be the complexity because there's various hurdles you have to jump over to prove that you are a qualifying beneficiary of them or whatever, that they don't claim. So the claim rates on many of these kind of things are low, but they do exist. And I would just suggest, one, speak to your electricity provider because they also, one, have advice about energy efficiency, but two, in terms of if there's any hardship or if there's any sort of rebates or deals which you're eligible for as an older Australian.
Let's do that one Thursday night as an issue. We'll go through that whole power issue. We're going to talk credit cards tonight. That is another vexed issue for everybody. And I don't think anyone who's not in the financial services business, Christopher, understands how come credit card interest rates are so high.
I think the easiest example is because they can get away with it.
Yeah.
That's why, and it's because, interestingly, there are a whole swag of low-interest credit cards at about 14% as opposed to almost 20%. But for whatever reason, and it can be that people are bundled in various sort of transaction accounts and insurances with banks, so they stick with the card, or they're given it is in terms of home loans as well, or they believe that the points and rewards and the whatever are worth paying that extra amount for. People, do tend to be stuck with the higher cards, when in fact it's quite easy to switch credit card. It's, of all things, it's actually one of the easiest. So I would just say for people who regularly pay interest, and they're known as revolvers in the trade, and it's about a third of people, although they represent about two-thirds of the outstanding balance of some $30+ billion on cards at the moment, that, move to a low interest card because that can make a real difference.
What do you classify as low interest and what do you classify as high?
Low interest tends to be around 14% and down, but there are some cards that have are 10%. So, you can go to some of these comparison sites and
so why wouldn't we all be on that? Or is it a card that has limited use or something?
Well, you can still use them most of the time, but they probably might not have such a flashy brand name, or they might not have a big bank attached, or there might not be awareness, or they're not marketed, or they might not have a balance transfer with umpteen free months of interest. So it's all the kind of bells and whistles that surround credit cards. And of course, with the advertising is all, the dream you can buy with the credit card, as opposed to the nightmare of actually paying it off for those people. And, they probably are a minority, those people who fall foul of cards, because they are a very handy instrument that we can use around the world. We can use for online shopping. We can use for umpteen things. But,
I had a family member who got in trouble with credit cards to the point where he was moving his way through cards to pay other cards, and ended up way down the line with one of those massively high interest rate providers who I won't mention because they really did, they hung out there the opportunity for him to get a card. They didn't care that he had, a lot of rolling debt. And I just hate that predatory behaviour.
Yeah, I'm afraid they exist. And there are regulations, but, there are there are people who do need some sort of credit at some stage, and when their credit score and their credit report is so damaged by defaults and having lots of credit cards, etc., then they're the ones who really end up paying top dollar.
So, 50UP Club members, what advice are we giving them on how to handle their cards properly?
Yeah, I mean, one thing I'd say, older Australians have been, I mean, the first
pretty
card
good, yep.
came in 74 with bank card.
Card. I can still remember bank card. It was green.
Yeah, and in fact, the limit then was $300. Now, $300 in 1974, that was worth getting out of bed for, but it's still nothing like the massive limits. You can get $10,000 on a card now. So look, the card situation has changed. I would think, I don't have the data to prove it, but older Australians are perhaps more infused with the idea of thrift and frugality and waiting, and had been through, different buying mechanisms such as lay-by, would appreciate that, to get everything now does come at a cost. And that's really the thing with credit cards. So older Australians might, know some of this, and this can be advice they can hand on. I mean, in terms of this, what you can do to drive change, and there is going to be a Senate inquiry, but we can't always wait for the politicians to act or regulate or whatever, is, as we just discussed, switch to the lower rate cards. They do exist. It's pretty straightforward to do it, and you'd be crazy. As I said, the points and the rewards are never worth it.
I've got a debit card from the Combank in my wallet. I've got an American Express card. I've got a MasterCard. I don't use the MasterCard very much. I use the American Express card regularly, and I pay it all off before when the bill comes, which I'm fortunate enough I can do that. And the debit card obviously comes straight out of my bank, so that's all managed pretty well. But you see people open their wallets, and they have, 5, 6, 7 cards.
Yeah, and in fact, I'll jump to tip number 4, which is if you have more than one credit card, ask why. And a lot of the reason is the way that these things have been marketed and sent to you. And while there is more regulation around that, so they're not allowed to entice you with high credit limits, there's been some interesting research to show that when you get a letter saying, we think you're more credit worthy, or we can extend this, or we'll give you a higher status card that's black or platinum, people actually will, get a bit of buzz out of that and think that somehow we've done the right thing. So, yeah, look, there's people who have work expenses a bit different, but, having a debit card and a credit card is a very good idea. And often I have my debit and credit card are exactly the same. So I often kind of choose debit as opposed to credit to keep the credit down. And certainly if it's for those things that are more discretionary and I might just be tempted to buy and not necessarily need.
We're talking to Christopher Zinn from the 50UP Club. Now, if you get that credit card bill at home and you open it up and you go, well, I simply haven't got enough money to pay much of that off, or if any of it, I'm going to have to roll it over and cop the interest. What should you be doing?
Yeah, I mean, you should be looking at, are you using
cutting it up is what you should be doing
in the first place, because there can be short-term, in a short term, that can be fine. Say, if you've got to buy a white good or something like that. But if that's becoming regular practice, then you become those, as I said, those revolvers who are so valuable to the credit cards and make, the banks and who issue 80% of the cards, make them, their profits bulge even more. So that's one of them, is do not abuse credit cards. And everyone will have a different, I mean, I see people buying chewing gum with credit cards now, which is a surprise to me. I suppose there's no great harm in it, but we all have, some background about what we think we buy cards with and whatever, and actually you should let yourself decide that in a wise sense, as opposed to let the marketing drive you, because actually they would love you to use cards non-stop all the time for everything.
Yes, they'd make a tidy profit out of it, don't they?
Yeah, exactly. And it's the cards, as I've said, are incredibly handy and useful, and I'm not against cards, and I don't think that they're necessarily duplicitous or tricky, although some of them are, and there's some 250 different sorts out there. But you just have to let you use the card for your convenience, not to let it use you. But of course, the temptation of have now, and one reason I carry cash is because I know that the hurdle of me getting out my wallet and paying cash makes a purchase more real than just pulling out the plastic. And now, of course, you can do it just with a tap and go, so there's nothing to sign. It's easier than ever. That makes it easier to rack up debt than ever. And there's an interesting guy who's written about this who said we shouldn't call them credit cards, we should call them debt cards, because actually that's what they are. We use them to incur debt. Credit is something that has a bit of a halo effect around it, but you're not getting credit, you're getting debt.
Very good point. Now, 50UP Club, 125,000 members. I'm one. You're actually taking another poll to compare credit card rates on what people are using or paying, are you?
Yeah, we're asking people actually just go on the poll and tell us what your rate is. And it'll be interesting to know, one, what it is, but two, how many people remember what it is. So we'd just be interested. But it's worth knowing what your rate is. And as I said, if it's 18, 19, even 20%, if you're regularly paying interest, there's no way that any food mixers, points, airline, air miles, whatever, are come anywhere near the cost that you pay in terms of that interest bill.
Always a pleasure to catch up. It's 50upclub.com, of course. I'll talk to you next week.
Yeah, will do, Steve. Thanks a lot.